Remember how in the last video I was excited to see Riot making Spirit Guard Udyr canon? Well, a week later they did it again. They turned another skin part of the canon universe. But this time it is probably a skin you expected the least. Mad Scientist Ziggs. Just like it was with Udyr. It's been a while since we have talked about Ziggs, so before we get into the new story, let's quickly sum up what happened in his bio. Unfortunately, his bio is not the longest, nor the newest. So I should warn you that a lot of his bio will likely get changed at some point in the future. It is that old. Ziggs was born with a great talent for tinkering. However, unlike all the other Yordle scientists, he was also chaotic and hyperactive. Despite these flaws, Ziggs aspired to be a revered inventor like the famous Heimerdinger. So he dove into the most ambitious projects, getting excited by both his explosive failures and all the new discoveries. Eventually, the famed Yordle Academy in Piltover learned about Ziggs' volatile experiments. Here I would like to point out that in the modern lore, Yordles are using disguises to hide among humans, because most humans believe that Yordles are extremely dangerous creatures. The concept of a famed Yordle Academy comes from the old lore, and it will likely get retconned eventually. In fact, in the new cards in Legends of Runeterra, the University of Piltover was revealed, and it is even showing a statue of Heimerdinger, who looks like a Yordle here, but people still think that he's a human. We'll get to that later. But yes, the Yordle Academy is likely not real. With that said, Piltover surely is full of Yordles, but they all attend normal science academies, at least as far as we know now. Anyway, after the Academy learned about Ziggs' experiments, the professors invited Ziggs over to demonstrate what he was doing. However, given how Ziggs' experiments usually go, without a sense for safety, his presentation had an early conclusion, as the Hextech engine he was demonstrating overheated and exploded, blowing a huge hole in the wall of the Academy. After that, the professors dusted themselves off and motioned for him to leave. Devastated, Ziggs prepared to return to Bandle City in shame. However, before he could leave, a group of Zaunite agents infiltrated the Academy and kidnapped the professors. The Piltovan military tracked the captives to a Zaunite prison, but their weapons were incapable of destroying the fortified walls. Determined to outdo them, Ziggs began experimenting on a new kind of armament, and quickly realized that explosives would be the right answer. Before long, Ziggs had created a line of powerful bombs he lovingly dubbed Hexplosives. With his new creations ready for their first trial, Ziggs traveled to Zaun and sneaked into the prison compound. He launched a gigantic bomb at the prison and watched with glee as the explosion tore through the reinforced walls. Once the smoke had cleared, Ziggs infiltrated the facility, sending guards running with a hail of bombs. He rushed to the cell, blew the door off its hinges, and led the captive Yordles to freedom. Upon returning to the Academy, the humbled professors recognized Ziggs with the title Dean of Demolitions. Vindicated at last, Ziggs accepted the proposal, eager to bring his ever-expanding range of explosives to Greater Valoran. Once again, I have to point out that this story came from the old lore. In fact, the reason why at the end it mentions that Ziggs would bring his explosives to Valoran is because in the old world, Valoran was the one massive continent we had. These days, Valoran is only the upper half of the map. Either way, because this old story kinda fits the new world as well, Riot was able to copy-paste it and let it be canon for the time being. After this bio, Ziggs got a comic with Jinx where we actually learned a lot more about his life in Piltover and Zaun. And thankfully, everything in this comic is canon. So now, let's quickly have a look at some more useful information. From the comic we learned that Ziggs was Heimerdinger's apprentice. And the reason why he looks so scary here is because this is where we learned how Yordles work. You see, Heimerdinger invented something called Glamour. It's some kind of a scientific spell that helps Yordles hide the fact that they are Yordles. Because in many parts of Runeterra, including Piltover and Zaun, humans believe that Yordles are extremely dangerous creatures. And so, with the help of Glamour, Yordles can transform to look more human. But here's the catch. The way Glamour works is that it makes the Yordles look less dangerous in the eyes of the beholder. So as different people look at the Yordle, they each see them a little bit differently. And this becomes important in just a moment. Anyway, here I would like to point out that Ziggs' real name is Zygmunt. And because he keeps using explosives to help all of their clients, Heimerdinger gets mad at him, so Ziggs decides to cool off outside. There he meets Jinx, who, because she's a bit insane, sees Ziggs as a normal Yordle, because to her, Ziggs doesn't look threatening, so the glamour has no effect. On top of that, Jinx thinks that Ziggs was made up by her imagination. Either way, because they both got a soft spot for explosions, they become friends. And Jinx convinces Ziggs to spend more time together and have more fun. While a night with explosives sounded great, at the back of his mind, Ziggs felt sad because he promised Heimerdinger he would stop using his bombs. But he quickly forgot about this promise as the two ruined a gallery, made a cake factory disappear, and blew up an opera house. For the grand finale, Jinx wanted to destroy the Warden Station. Ziggs didn't want to hurt anyone, and so he asked her if they could let people evacuate the building first. But Jinx told him that she would find it boring if there were no people inside. And so, in an attempt to save the people inside, Ziggs stole Jinx's ignition device and ran away. Unfortunately, with her rocket launcher, Jinx was able to easily stop Ziggs and get the ignition back. Then she set off the explosives. The explosion was so massive that Jinx actually felt bad for a moment. But when she learned that nobody died, she got happy again. This is when Ziggs's glamour wore off, and people noticed that he was just a Yordle. Again, because people are afraid of Yordles, they wanted to kill him. And so Ziggs called out to Heimerdinger, who was in the crowd, to tell everyone that he wasn't dangerous. But doing so would put Heimerdinger in danger too. So the easiest option was to simply pretend he didn't know him and abandon Ziggs entirely. After this, the two parted ways, and Ziggs left with Jinx. That's how Ziggs moved from Piltover to Zaun. While this is where the comic ends, the newest story directly continues it. So without further ado, let's dive into the story Bombs, a Tribute. And let's have a look at what Ziggs is doing these days. The story begins with Ziggs explaining the situation. He just arrived in Zaun, and he was ready to blow stuff up. All the time in Piltover, where he served high-quality pyrotechnics to ungrateful snoots, and where Heimerdinger made him hide behind glamour, while not allowing him to do what he wanted, left Ziggs thirsty for explosions. He wondered if Jinx was right, if Zaun really was teeming with an explosive potential. He started his exploration of Zaun by checking out the buildings around him. Among all the nondescript buildings, and slightly bigger nondescript buildings, he found an explosives factory, which to Ziggs was a dream come true. He even cried a little bit, though he blamed it on the Zaun Grey, which was the layer of polluting smoke that separated Piltover from Zaun. Ziggs tried to imagine all the things that must have been inside, but he paused when he realized how normal the building looked. Dull even. No flashing lights, no sparkling signs, just a rundown pile of bricks and ironwork. It was like no one even cared how bombs were made, and suspiciously it was quiet there. Ziggs realized they probably had to soundproof that place, because of all the live bomb testing. This made Ziggs really excited to get inside. He thought that maybe there was a super secret passageway, or maybe he had to blow the front wall off. But then he noticed that the place actually had front door. Although there was a small sign on it which said, "Building no longer in use. Keep out." This made Ziggs angry. He couldn't understand why did someone do this, or how could this sacred place no longer be in use. How could anyone be so disrespectful of the creation of lovely explosives and shut it down forever? Then he heard a noise. But on top of that, he noticed the lock on the front door was mangled. It looked like the door was busted open, which meant that no one would probably mind if Ziggs poked around a bit. To his surprise, instead of bombs, inside he found a pair of young humans, who just stood there in an empty room. Watching them, he slowly started losing interest in this place. But then, looking disappointed, one of the kids talked about how much this place sucked. They expected to find this place full of bombs, but they have searched every corner and there was nothing. As Ziggs listened, he started feeling for the kid. In fact, he felt the exact same way. The other one kicked over an empty crate, frustrated about the fact that someone cleared this place out. Finally, a while later, after they got bored, the two kids left. Then, when Ziggs was alone, he got a chance to think about what he had found. On his first venture out in the Undercity, he found a bomb factory, entirely committed to making bombs. It could have been his home, but unfortunately instead it was just the home of shattered dreams. However, Ziggs wasn't someone who would just leave things like this, and so he decided to do something about it. And after a while of thinking, he figured out what would be the right thing to do. He was going to fill this place with bombs. The story then cuts to Ziggs working in Jinx's lab. She let him crash here while he finds his feet in Zaun. This means that the two became roommates. Here Ziggs also revealed that Jinx still thinks that Ziggs exists only in her head. So she didn't feel like he was taking up too much space either. Unfortunately, with all the piles of junk lying around here, Ziggs didn't think he would be the only furry thing around here. But he didn't really care. He then revealed that he was currently working on some explosives, which were his own design. So at least we know that the explosives from the outdated bio are still canon. He was crafting these bombs to give the old factory the send-off it deserved. He didn't want to leave the place the way he found it, because just like the two kids who left heartbroken, he didn't want other people to also get excited by the factory, only to leave it disappointed again. So instead he would fill the place up with his own devices. And then they would go off one after another like little fireworks, until the place would crumble down in a huge exploding mess. He called this invention chain smokers. With his project complete, he was ready to go to the factory again. Once he was there, he set his little chain smokers all over the place. However, should he watch the explosion from the outside, he wouldn't really get to see how the explosions went off. So, as an extra treat, he decided to blow off the front wall first, before he would take the rest of the place down. The bomb that would help him do that was a big one he called the Party Popper. It was going to make the biggest peephole anyone had ever seen. And so, with all his bombs ready, he counted to 3 and pressed the button, which set off a timer for 60 seconds. You know, he still had to get out first. Outside, he was getting anxious, as he was waiting for the explosion. He crossed the street a bit too quickly, so now he had entire 40 seconds of waiting. To entertain himself, he wanted to tell a joke about why did the Yordle cross the street, but he stopped when he noticed the two kids from before approaching the factory again. What was worse, the kids stopped there and they started spray painting the wall. Ziggs had no other option than to come out from the hiding and shout at them to get away from there. This surely got their attention, but the kids still didn't move. It was probably because they have never seen a Yordle before. At first, Ziggs thought that they would be afraid of him, but then the kids started laughing at him. For a moment, Ziggs considered just leaving the kids there to get exploded. That's what Jinx would have done. But then he remembered that Jinx was a psychopath. With only 10 seconds left on the clock, Ziggs sprinted towards the little kids. As for them, it was better to get tackled by a Yordle than crushed by a building. They hit the other side of the street just as the wall went up. The explosion was mesmerizing, little lightning bolts striking every surface, bricks tumbling down, smoke pouring out, clouding all the locals who have come out to watch. Then Ziggs noticed that all the people around were staring at him instead of his art. The roof was now completely caved in. In his eyes it was magical, and it made Ziggs do his happy dance. While this was happening, those two kids were looking at him like he just slapped their grandmother. He guessed Zaunites were more used to collapsing buildings than gleeful Yordles. Whatever, Ziggs was going in for a closer look. His chain smokers performed just as planned. What was once a solid structure was now a blackened heap of rubble. Then another spark went off, bright like a flashbang. It waited for Ziggs to have a front row seat. After that, Ziggs felt like he was on fire. And in fact, he was. He was suddenly flying through the air with a trail of smoke. And so, that's how Ziggs left the scene, with his final words being, "See kids? Now that's how you make bombs." And that is it for Ziggs. I really like this new trend of Riot turning more skins canon. It is a great alternative to making new skins based on lore. And honestly, there is still a lot more skins that could be turned part of the story too. But what's awesome about the mad scientist Ziggs is that technically this is what Ziggs looks like now. This is his present appearance, which may be one of the reasons why they made this skin also for Wild Rift. And yes, I know, Gragas is there too, so he could definitely use the same treatment.